Well, now that we've got this body off this LS6 El Camino, it's time to strip the paint off it and the body filler. Well, once you get the panels back from whatever process you're going to use to strip it, two things you're going to see. You're going to see all of the body damage. You can see the repairs here. They brazed in a piece. We're going to have to take that out. It's not a proper repair. You can see they drilled a bunch of holes, tried brazing it. As soon as we got the blaster to it, it popped through. That's one thing. If you have holes in it, you're going to have to MIG weld those up or TIG weld those up. You don't want to use brass anywhere. You can see where it's wrinkled and it's been cut. You can also see some lead repairs like up here. Now, lead has consistently been called a good thing to use over the years. Why they use the lead is because, again, they could get away with murder. So what we're going to do is melt out all the lead out of all the body work on this car, and then we're going to prep it like we always do. And this is a key point. You have to make sure that there's no rust forming, no humidity landing on this panel. As soon as we get it stripped, we take it in. We use a roll-lock wheel over the entire panel, make sure that if there's anything starting already, we want to get rid of it. We're going to immediately put it into epoxy primer. That's going to protect the panel. Now, a lot of guys say, oh, I'll just save some time here. I'm going to do all the body work or metal work first, then I'll put it into epoxy. Well, trust me, if you leave this panel out, just in the air for a week or 2 weeks, you've got rust starting to form. Unless you're going to go back and re-strip those panels, you better put it into epoxy primer right away. Well, talking about lead, like I said, a lot of the roof panels were leaded onto the quarter panels and the A-pillars, and it's no different for this El Camino project here. You can see this is where originally the roof panel would have been spotted here on the A-pillar and the back to the quarter panel. Now, why would you think if we were doing a repair today, we would never, for starters, overlap the panel, and we would definitely never spot it an inch away and expect it not to come back to haunt us? And if you look at a lot of muscle cars today, you can see cracks, you can see blistering, always happening at the original lead seams. So what we do is we melt out all of the original lead, and you can see here what the factory covered up. For starters, spot weld, maybe every inch, won't work. Little tack weld in the corner, that's not too bad. You can see here the panel didn't quite fit. There's a gaping hole here that you can put your pinky finger into. Well, what we're going to do is we're going to strip off this primer. We're going to actually lift up the lead a little bit here. We're going to make sure all of the lead is melted out because it's really hard, can't weld to lead. And then what we're going to do is hammer and dolly it back. We're going to TIG it solid all the way around, fill in this hole with metal. We're going to actually TIG that hole up. You can also see here where from the factory didn't fit, they beat down the roof here to fit the quarter panel and then just use lead over the whole thing. Now, lead, there's nothing wrong with it, but if it isn't prepped properly, there's acid in it. It'll come back to haunt us. Well, really, the El Camino was GM's early attempt at creating a pickup truck that drove like a car. Obviously, today, with sales of pickup trucks through the roof, they were on the right track. Now, what they did here is they actually put an LS6 in, they loaded this car up, had tons of options, great looking car, truck, whatever you want, the El Camino, and it was actually functional. You could throw things in the back of this. Up here, you saw guys throwing snowmobiles into these things. Well, what happened though is the beds took a beating. Really didn't matter, it was a work truck. So we thought, well, now the LS6, super rare in a Chevelle, ultra rare in El Camino. We're trying to restore the bed of this truck as well as the rest of it. There's some time involved here. I mean, look at the size of this. Plus, we have some other unique problems. We've got the problem underneath here. There's bracing that goes back and forth this way. As people threw in hammers and sleds and all sorts of equipment in here, it got scratched, it got dented. How do we fix that today? Well, we can hammer and dolly as much as we can, and that's what we did, but with those braces in place, we're in a little bit of trouble. So what we ended up doing is we ended up having to put a skim coat of body filler over top of this to straighten it out, to make it look smooth again. So what we did is we sandblasted the entire bed first, along with the rest of the vehicle. The corrugated steel here, it's actually strong enough you can take a blaster, make sure all the rust is out, it won't warp it. But then what we did is we started making some unique tools. One of the tools we ended up making here is an applicator. Now, a normal body filler applicator looks like this, but you can see it's too thick. You can't get it in between, you're gonna have to twist it. So what we did is we made one from scratch here, fits really nicely in there. We can apply all the filler from one end to the other. Now, that's fine, and everybody knows the less filler you can apply, the less work you have sanding it off. That's the whole principle behind this. Well, when you start sanding, we make an aluminum block. That aluminum block fits quite nicely right in between here, so we can get that. The top of this piece here we can sand quite nicely again with the smaller aluminum block. And when we start, again the top, we start with a great big aluminum block, and what this does is keep that surface nice and flat. Now the problem is in these edges here. So what we did out of epoxy is we made our own piece. We actually molded it. See how nice it fits right over top of that? We then put sandpaper in over top of this. You stick it on here and you can go back and forth, so each rib is uniform like they were originally when they were stamped. So a lot of work goes into the bed of this El Camino, but if you're going to restore it to 100%, the box has to look as good as the rest. It's one of those things, and especially with a silver car, you're going to have a lot of work going into the back of this. We probably have an extra 100 hours above any sort of standard restoration just in the box of this El Camino. Well, just about every car out there presents its unique challenges when it comes to paintwork. Cars like this GTO, a nice solid color, they're probably the easiest. Cars like this 70 Hemi Cuda, it's a little trickier. Anything that's plum crazy purple, anything that's metallic for that matter, you got to make sure that the metallic flake goes on nice and even. You don't want it blotchy looking. Now cars like the El Camino, that's a totally unique deal, and I'll go through it. There was 4 interesting aspects to painting this car. Well, number 1 on this is obviously it has a set of hood stripes. What we did is Ground Up gave us the template, and it's a stencil, and basically you lay it on the hood. It'll make sure that the pinstripe's in the right location, it'll make sure the stripe is the right location, and it'll make sure the size is correct. But the problem with these templates is they're pretty good, but they're not perfect. So what we use it as an outline. Then we'll do everything in fine line tape. And what fine line tape will allow you to do is get a nice, clean, crisp edge so you won't get any bleeding on any of the corners. And actually, as you go around the corners, it makes, again, a nice, clean corner. You don't have to worry about the black bleeding through or the silver bleeding through. It gives you a nice, distinct, sharp edge. Now, the second problem that's unique with this car is it's silver. Silvers are always tricky to paint. And here's the reasons. Is silver is a very light metallic, and what happens is the metal actually wants to go in any fine scratches. So with a solid color like the GTO, we can finish it with 400 wet. With a car like this, a light metallic, we're going to have to go to 800 sandpaper. We're going to have to do it wet, and we're going to have to get rid of every fine sand scratches. It's a lot more work actually to paint a light metallic car. And the other thing is in the door jambs, you have to be careful too, because if any body work is a little bit rougher there, it's going to show up tenfold on a silver car. Now, Glazeret recommends that we go with 800 wet. These guys have been, it's a European company, these guys have been making paint for Mercedes for years, and you think about it, every other Benz out there is silver. They do produce the best silver out there. Well, the real problem to the El Camino, the bed back here, is because it's a silver metallic, trying to make sure that the bed isn't blotchy either, and you've got these ribs here, so you're trying to get paint on both sides. The odds of leaning over and doing the entire outside of the vehicle and the bed all at once, it's risky. What's going to happen is the painter's going to lean in, he's going to touch, he's going to make a mess of it. So what we did is we painted the entire exterior of the truck first, and then we taped off the entire exterior once it's dry, and then we did the bed separately so he could lean in as far as he needed and not have to worry about getting caught on the outside of it. That was the third issue. The last issue with this truck is, again, it's silver, and it's got great big quarter panels that go into the doors. It's a nice flat area. Now you can really show off a straight truck or vehicle here, or it can make a mess if it's a wavy thing. So when we're sanding and polishing the side of this truck, we're going to start off with an aluminum block, make sure that it's not mottled at all, and that way it's going to look laser straight when it's done. When it comes to getting all the right hardware, the guys at Ground Up are great. They've got little kits and packages, and they're going to take you through all the little items to make that restoration right.
The first question I'm generally asked is, how did you get into this? How did you get into something so specialized as this? Well, it was truly a passion. Started back in 1980. I bought my first convertible 68 Chevelle Super Sport. Car was in rough shape. I mean, this is something that's been a New England car up in Rhode Island. It was in rough shape. Quarters, fenders, doors. It needed everything. So I guess the quest began then is, hey, I want this car nice. I want a nice red 68 Chevelle convertible, and that's what I want. So the quest was on is, how do I find parts? Well, at that point in time, you could still go to the GM dealer. It was early enough. The car was only 12, 13 years old. You could still go to the GM dealer. A lot of the stuff was still available from General Motors. As the years went on, General Motors started drying up. The products just discontinued. So that's when the real trouble began in the mid-'80s, trying to find parts for these cars. And that's when the idea came. I started scouring the local swap meets and things of that nature, and just was amazed that the parts were actually there. The reproduction parts were there. Wow, I can go and I can actually finish this project. Well, we got to the point where the car was done. I mean, it was there, it looked good, but you know something, you would open the hood and it just wouldn't look right. Well, recently what we've done, we've gone ahead and we've reproduced a lot of these hoses using the GM restoration program. We've actually had a lot of original hoses that we were able to find through the years, take them, source them out, get the licensing from GM, and have that GM part number put on that hose. So now when you do open up that hood, the first thing that's going to come up is, hey, that hose, look at that hose. It's got the GM markings on it, on your radiator hoses, your heater hoses, your bypass hoses, air cleaner hose, your PCV hose, and even right down to the washer hose. I mean, this washer hose, you couldn't find a thin-walled washer hose at your local auto parts store. You just couldn't have it, but there it is. From that point, it just kind of evolved from there. It went crazy. Well, what about this? We would start getting calls. Hey, how about this? Do you guys have this? You know what, the bolts. And the bolts really started driving me crazy. Well, at Ground Up, we do carry everything from literally the ground up. We can provide you with the weather strip, the interior, all the interior items, your carpets, all your moldings, your wheel opening moldings, your rims, your tires, right down to the lug nut. But I feel we take it a step further. We really know these cars. We're into these cars, and we have a passion for this. Take, for instance, this nice TCS solenoid and vacuum lines we set up. Well, at Ground Up, we're not necessarily the largest company out there, but we truly are purists. We live, we eat, we breathe this. We are all passionate about what we do. All the guys on the sales order desk, they've had these cars. They've been down that road. They know it. It's not necessarily the point getting the whole restoration parts order. We're comfortable just getting this little bracket, for instance, or the accelerator cable. That's what it's about to us. It's about the passion of it.
Well, one of my big pet peeves about restorations is not the fact that they're cosmetically not right. We've bought lots of cars over the years that have been show winners. They've been trailer queens, and literally that. They've been pushed on and off trailers. So when we get them to the shop here and we actually want to drive it around the block or we want to sell it to a customer, we have to go through it from one end to the other. That's one of the things, when we tore this car apart, it was a run and driving car. It wasn't the prettiest car, but it actually drove down the road. It was missing lots of pieces. We started from scratch. You know, we had to find a lot of hard to get pieces for this car. But one of the things, other than the cosmetics of this restoration, that we always try to focus on is I want this car to work. I want the lights to work. I want the turn signals to work. I want the clock to work. I want the power windows to work. I want the air, if it has air conditioning, I want it to work. I want the defrost to work, especially up here in Canada in the fall. Same thing with the way the car drives. It's not just good enough to have the car finished, nut and bolted, and we do. We want to go through the car, we want to do a nut and bolt on every piece once the restoration's done. We actually have a checklist that the guys will go through. Cosmetically, the car is perfect. Now we'll go through all the mechanical and all the finicky little things. Those things are just as important to me as how the car looks. Well, once the car is done, generally what we want to do is take it for a nice road test. We want to put on maybe 50 miles. We want to have a list of all the deficiencies when it comes back. Maybe it's got a rattle, maybe it's got a squeak. Well, there's no way I'm going to be able to take a ground-up restored car out in this weather, let alone for an hour or for 50 miles. That's why we put a chassis dyno in here. For 3 months of the year, we do all our testing inside. Right now, it's just like driving down the highway, you know, doing 50, 60 miles an hour, and we'll just run it like that for a while, get everything nice and warm, and just make sure there's no issues with anything. I think what we'll do is we'll try a nice, easy pull. Just bring it up into high gear. We're in high gear. Put a little load on it there and it's starting to ping, so we're going to back off the timing a little before we run it again, and that's part of the process here. Really what we're doing here is we're not using it for tuning purposes, we're using it as a run-in dyno, meaning that we're going to put a few miles on it, we're going to make sure everything's working fine. If this car were going to be driven every day, or if this car was going to be taken to the drag strip, we'd do some tuning here. We'd try and see what horsepower, base horsepower we're starting with. We change the timing, we change the jets, we do all those things. But really, this is about drivability. When we hand the keys back to this customer, we'll want to make sure you can jump in it, drive it around the block, take it to the local cruise, and have fun in it.